All right, Madam Mayor, I think we have everyone on and we are ready to resume our 6 p.m. hearing for LDC 21-00054 in addition to LDC 21-00055, PAR 21-00034, PAR 21-00035, Daybreak Plan Areas 18A and 19B Maps 1 and 2.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this time, Madam Clerk, we'll now open the public hearing. Was proper notice given and any correspondence received?
Proper notice was given, and we did receive correspondence from one individual, Kathleen Burks, in support of the appeal. No public comment has registered at this time, so we're ready to proceed.
All right, thank you so much. I would like to ask, do any council members have any disclosures? Seeing that there are none, I'm going to send it over to the famous Carl Hall, our city attorney, to please read the item.
We're going to start off with I-1, and this is an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to approve the tentative maps for Daybreak Villages 18A, 19B, and associated sequential parcel maps, LDC 21-00054, Daybreak Plan Area 18A, LDC 21-00055, Daybreak Plan Area 19B, PAR 21-00034, Daybreak Plan 17, 18, 19, Map 1, and PAR 21-00035, Daybreak Plan 17, 18, 19, Map 2, Ward 3.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask Angela if you, am I wrong? Angela, would you please come up and give us a presentation? And then I will call on Councilwoman Breckus.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Angela Foose, Assistant CD Director. And we're going to get started.
Yes, Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record.
What was that?
That was us. We're good.
Oh,
Moving
okay.
forward. Testing you. We did great, guys.
Zooming in or not.
Brooke is out of town, but apparently he's speaking to us from somewhere else.
Madam Mayor and Ms. Foose, before you begin, a point of order. Can I understand there are 4 separate appeals? Can someone explain to me how we're going to take each one, or how the appellant will be offered time? I'd just like to know the protocol for how we're going to operate this
This is
evening.
unique because they're doing 2 parcel maps. And
So since there's 4 different appeals, we thought we'd take them each in turn, 10 minutes each on each appeal. So the applicant or the appellant will get 10 minutes on appeal number 1, and the respondent will get 10 minutes to respond after we have an initial introduction from Angela Foose.
Okay, and then, sorry, are you going to address all of them or each appeal in its own right?
I'm going to do one presentation for all 4.
Understand.
And just as a point of reference, we do have a public comment, so general standard practice is that we do the staff presentation, the applicant or the appellant would make their case, and then we would take public comment before deliberation, and then we would proceed from there.
Okay, just stop me if I keep going,
Thank you.
because I want to make sure we get public comment in. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good evening again. So a little bit of background on this case. This is part of the original Daybreak planned unit development. Overall, this is a fairly significant large project, almost 1,000 acres, close to 4,000 units. It includes everything from parks and schools, all kinds of different development agreements. The backbone infrastructure, that's the roads, the sewer lines, the water lines, the power lines, phasing of this overall site. Again, it's a large project. It's anticipated to be built out over a 20-year period. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different phases. One piece that's also outlined in that Daybreak PUD is the village parcel concept, and we're going to go over that. So just giving you a little bit of background before we get into this appeal is there's 2 ways to create a parcel. And when I say create a parcel, that means that the house that you live in is on a piece of land that has one parcel number. That is an APN. And there's ways to create those APNs. The first step and the easiest step is if you just want to do less than 4 lots, so 4 or less parcels, you would do a parcel map. It's a staff level review. It does not go to a public hearing. It's typically when you want to have a simpler division where you're not looking at utilities and you're not looking at roads. You're looking at 4 parcels being subdivided. From a timing perspective, it's a one-step process. You submit an application, City of Reno reviews it, a number of other agencies review it, they all give you comments. You then come back, make those changes, and you submit a map that gets recorded. That whole process is about 3 to 4 months. When you have a larger subdivision, when you have more than 4 parcels, you do what's called a tentative map process. That's a 2-step process. We do a tentative and a final. This is a state law requirement, so this is nothing that's unique to us. This is the whole state of Nevada does it this way. From a timing perspective, it's a much longer process. All tentative maps, again, you're creating more than 4 parcels, has to go to a planning commission. They review it, they put together conditions of approval. Then the applicant puts together what we call the final map. That is the final design. Tentative map, that name implies tentative, preliminary, that's exactly what that is. It is a preliminary map that says here's where we're going to create these lots, here's where we're going to put sewer lines and water lines. When you get to the final map, that is the very specific final. This is exactly where those roads are going to go and where those utilities are going to go. That is exactly the boundary of those new parcels. So you can see by the graphics, very simple process on the parcel map process, much longer, in-depth process as part of the tentative map process. Generally, a tentative map to final map is about a 12 to 18-month process. Now, within the Daybreak PUD, they call it a separate mapping process, and it's called for village parcels. This is not the first time you've seen this concept. It's generally used on big master plan communities. If you think about it, you have 1,000 acres, and you know that one home builder is not going to build 4,000 homes on that 1,000 acres, especially because it's being processed over 20 years. So as home builders come in, pick any home builder, D.R. Horton, Toll Brothers, Ryder, they're going to purchase a parcel, a large parcel, from the master developer. Then they're going to come in and subdivide it through that subsequent parcel map process. But if you go back to, again, how do you create a parcel? So how do I create a parcel that I want to sell to Devin, who's then going to build a bunch of houses on it? You can do it through that parcel map process or that tentative map process. So this village parcel concept is intended for big developments that have master plan communities. Now, one thing that's unique about planned unit developments is they outline everything in advance. They outline who's going to build all of your roads and your sewer lines and your water lines. And they do it in a manner that says either the home builders will do that or the master developer will do that. In this case, this PUD, everything is outlined in a long matrix that it covers about 4 pages of their handbook. And it says specifically what the master developer is responsible for building and what the individual home builder, we call them the merchant builder, the Toll Brothers of the world, what they are responsible for building. So there's no question as to, well, how do I know if I put a subdivision together that's over here and South Meadows Parkway is over here? How do I know I'm going to get a road from South Meadows to my development? It's all outlined in the PUD. That's a recorded document. Furthermore, within the PUD, there's a requirement that when the master developer sells a parcel to a home builder, they have to give them a copy of the PUD, and they have to acknowledge that these are all the things that you, Mr. Home Builder, are responsible for building, and these are the things that us as the merchant builder are responsible for building. So it's all set out, it's all predefined, it's all recorded as part of this master plan document. With those village parcels, it was also called out within the handbook that those parcel maps would have to go to a planning commission for review. And again, parcel maps generally don't ever have to go to planning commission for review, but in this case, they said they were going to planning commission for review. It was all called out ahead of time and agreed upon. So let's go specifically to the Daybreak Appeal. There are 4 issues being discussed as part of this appeal. We're going to take each one individually. The first one has to do with off-site improvements. How do we know that when we have these tentative maps coming in and these parcel maps coming in, that all of those off-site improvements, your sewer lines, your water lines, your roadways, how do we know that they're going to be built? What happens again, go back to that concept, you've got South Meadows Parkway over here, and you've got a development somewhere over here. You've got a bunch of land in between. How do we know that a road and all those utilities are going to get from South Meadows to that developer? And in response, the handbook specifically identifies this is where all those infrastructure improvements are going to go. This is who's going to put them in. The master developer is responsible for all of that. So that is a requirement. There's no changing that unless they want to change the handbook. So that's, again, very clearly defined as part of the handbook of how that's going to occur. Issue number 2. When you do these parcel maps, and we're calling them sequential parcel maps because you're trying to subdivide a parcel multiple times through a parcel map, when normally you would subdivide a parcel into a bunch of little parcels through a tentative map process. How come the parcel map conditions of approval were not the same as the tentative map conditions of approval? And going back to, what does a tentative map do? It defines individual lots. It's a 6,000 square foot lot here and an 8,000 square foot lot here. All of that is conditioned to say how utilities get there, how infrastructure gets there. At a parcel map, which is 4 parcels, 4 bigger parcels, that doesn't have to be defined. The only thing you are required to define is where's your access. You have to have an access easement. Just show us where you're going to put an easement. You can move that easement because, again, these are big parcels. When your master developer comes in, he will come in with a tentative map, and he will show you where all of those individual roads will go. But again, going back to the Daybreak PUD, it was all predetermined where the major roads were going to go and where the major utilities were going to go. So that was all predetermined and pre-agreed to as part of the PUD. So state law does not require that you have to have the same conditions of approval on a parcel map that you would with a tentative map. You have the ability to condition a parcel map, but historically, we as the City of Reno don't typically condition parcel maps because, again, we're not looking at where whole subdivisions are going. We're looking at 4 parcels, show us where all your planned or public utility easements are going to go, at least show us an easement where they could go, and show us how you're going to get access to that larger parcel. Issue number 3 that was brought up as part of the appeal. So while state law contemplates there'll be tentative maps and parcel maps, the appeal argued that they were also going to be subject to agreements. Now, when we looked in state law, we couldn't find anything that specifically said tentative maps and parcel maps have to be subject to agreements. There is language about a development agreement, and again, that is agreement between 2 parties that both agree to the terms of that development agreement. Because Daybreak did not do a development agreement, they did, however, do about 5 or 6 separate agreements. They have a park agreement, they have an agreement for affordable housing contributions, they have an agreement for a sports fee, a number of just separate agreements that they agreed to, and again, as a willing participant, that City of Reno agreed to and they agreed to. So we don't call those development agreements, we just call those separate agreements as part of the planned unit development. So we didn't add any additional requirements for the tentative map or the parcel map that required they added any additional agreements. And finally, issue number 4. These broad tentative map conditions are related to infrastructure improvements, and there was concerns that could be problematic. And that goes back to if we condition these tentative maps to bring in sewer lines and water lines and all the other infrastructure, are we requiring some kind of taking, or are we stepping outside of our boundaries as to what we're requiring that may not be able to happen because there's differences in ownership over the years? Think about any new development, and you can pick any part of town. Let's pick Military Road or Lemon Drive. You have development that's happening. Usually there's not sewer lines and water lines already constructed to that new development. So we conditioned that if you come in with a tentative map, you as Mr. Developer have to bring in that infrastructure. That is part of your job. You have to work with the utility companies to figure out how you're going to get it there, and then you have to pay to put in that infrastructure. This is no different. The only difference here is that it's already outlined and predetermined as part of that PUD amendment or PUD approval. So again, This was not anything different than we would normally see with any other tentative map, except everything is already outlined as to process and who does what in the PUD handbook. So that is all I had for today. Planning Commission did approve 2 tentative maps and 2 parcel maps. They were in agreement with the conclusions and the analysis that staff came up to, and I'll be available if you have any questions.
Okay, Angela, thank you. Okay, Councilman Breckus.
Thank you, Madam.
Oh, sorry.
Point of order.
I'm not council member.
We raised a standing issue that I think we should have addressed before we get to the merits of the appeal. So if we could, I can briefly speak to that, and then you guys can decide whether there's standing to proceed.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll stand back.
Okay,
Briefly, as you know, standing is jurisdictional, so without it, you don't have to proceed with the appeal and you're required to dismiss it. We think there are 2 grounds why standing does not exist tonight. First, as we indicated in our July 6th letter, Ms. Breckus did not appeal at the Planning Commission. Under the Kay and Mesagate case law, in order to have standing to appeal to the council, you have to participate in the Planning Commission proceedings. You can't contend you're aggrieved by their decision if you didn't participate in the decision that they reached in the first place. Secondly, while we recognize your code does grant council members a right to appeal, case law also requires that appellants independently show that they have a personal or property right that is substantially and adversely impacted by an application. There's been no showing of that in this case by Ms. Breckus, so we would respectfully request that you consider both of those. We recognize that as a council member, she has every right to advocate for policy issues, or she can choose to oppose projects as an advocate. If she chooses to step down off that dais and become an advocate, then she should be subject to all of the exact same rules and requirements any other advocate would be required to follow, including standing requirements. So we would ask that you make a determination on standing before we proceed.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Councilman Reese.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My questions are directed to our legal counsel. So this question is one that I raised in my briefings, and I want to make sure that I'm clear, because fundamentally, I had originally believed that perhaps Mr. Pawnee was right, but I do not think he is right at this moment, because I think that there's a carve-out for the elected members to step off of this body and be appellants, and that the code section just says basically any council member or an aggrieved party. So I guess I would like to know, and from legal standpoint, while I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer, and so I'd like to have our lawyers opine on that.
Our opinion is that Councilmember Breckus does have standing pursuant to code, under 1808-306.
Okay, so I can make the findings as to standing, and I would move that Councilmember Breckus has standing to make the appeal.
Second.
All right, I have a motion, I have a second. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
And I just want to use this as a teachable moment to what Mr. Pawnee said, is he says, if I want to be an advocate, I need to participate down in the Planning Commission. Why would an appellate body step down at the planning, go to every planning commission and intervene themselves? They only do it when they are aggrieved. Otherwise, they would prejudice their job and might as well be planning commissioners. But a teachable moment here for all of us, when we redid the code, we thought, the consultants recommended, that we have a call-up procedure that was in this code many years ago, where someone could call up and say, I think we need clarification, and not come as an opposing and adverse person to our staff, to a project. And I come more in that nature, but I wanted to illustrate it to a missed moment that we did on our code. And when you start to watch this, and I'm going to ask you to watch the Planning Commission, you'll see that a call-up procedure would have been very nice for clarification to everyone all around. But that's an example of Mr. Pawnee's circular logic on this argument. He's, and you know, by all means, start my clock now, because I've addressed the standing. I'm prepared to go in. To my understanding, I have 40 minutes, 10 minutes for each one, and I'll defer to the body of how you want to allocate and break up my time. But I think this is all interconnected, and the complexity of it, when you start watching how the Planning Commission struggled, I think will make you think that you need to hear it all in total. But maybe leave that for when my clock runs runs down. But, you know, Mr. Pogny says, well, Ms. Breckus, I think he footnotes it, she opposed the Daybreak PUD, insinuating that I have some problem with this project. And then he also says, well, we've done all these other subdivisions for already. So it's an internal logic one. It's easier to follow. Some of his legal arguments that are wrapped around, twisted around are not as easy to follow. But what is it? Because wouldn't you have thought if they had done all these other subdivisions earlier in the year or after the development PUD, I would have been here as an appellant on those? What is it about these two that causes the confusion? And it is the novel application of the law. It doesn't follow the PUD, and the PUD, even if it did follow the PUD, does not trump the law. Ms. Foose and I will use the word staff to refer to everyone in Mr. Thornley's chain of command today, I think really confuses the issue. The parcel map is not here and the tentative here to go in tandem together. The statute does not work that way. There is an exemption to the subdivision law. This doesn't fall under the subdivision. You can't be doing two subdivisions on the same land at once. That's a pragmatic reading of this novel approach. And I will leave that here for you now, but it's very simple in that way. But the complexity of the public concerns on this are serious, and they go deeper. And I want to tell the story, the tale of two projects down in this area. There's the tale of Double Diamond, where the follow-up on the master developer did not occur, involved years and years of litigation. I think the city is still paying through its CIP for some of the gaps and forgets that happened with that master developer. Compare that very clearly with the Damani Ranch that has had consistent front-load planning that made the certainty of that project build out over many years. And I come with great concern to you that the way the project was originally packaged, and I will go over that, with so much hanging out there on what this infrastructure is, creates a higher risk where you could be in double diamond land, where the city could be on the hook for these improvements, and a lot of people saying, not me, you do this, rather than, the quality project that has resulted in Damani Ranch, a well-built out community that advances all of our visions of a good place to live in fragile environmental lands. So we're going to start with the Planning Commission discussion, and I think that what they've done at this point when we catch up here, and it was on Zoom, I think it was their last meeting on Zoom, so I don't even think we need to really see, I think one of them wasn't even on camera, so who cares, but I'll ask Ms. Huntsman to run the video, and I want to just set it up, is, as explained, they've already done some subdivisions, those have already occurred, and when we're here, when we're listening to this audio, they've done these other two subdivisions that night. One was 78 units, one was 81 units. So they've done some subdivision, and those are called tentative maps. And now this novel approach, which I believe does not have merit or precedent, is being done for these parcel maps. And let's listen to this for a little bit.
Looks like we're still waiting for Johnson to join us. There he is.
Okay, I think everybody's back. Let's get started again. We will start with item 4.5 and 4.6. It looks like the language is the same. Case number PAR 21-0034 Daybreak Plan 17-18-19 Map 1. This is a request for a merger and re-subdivision of parcels with the intent to create village parcels. Item 4.6, case number PAR 21-00035 Daybreak Plan 17-18-19 Map 2. This is a request for a merger and re-subdivision of parcels with the intent to create village parcels. Do we have a presentation, Mr. Kirkland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Derek Kirkland Wood Rogers. I do have a presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You guys see that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, so we'll be talking about the sequential parcel maps, basically creating the village parcels for the tentative maps that have recently been approved. Sorry, it's going backwards on me for some reason. Yeah, there you go. So essentially, what we're doing here with the parcel maps is so PUD section 2.8 actually allows sequential parcel maps through a planning commission approval. And so, really to not make this too difficult, essentially what we're doing is we get into the development plans. Obviously, we're pushing and pulling a little bit. So as part of this process, we also wanted to kind of clean up some of the land use, which the PUD also allows under 2.6 flexibility. But in terms of the parcels themselves, essentially all we're doing is to basically make the village boundaries match the tentative map boundaries. And the reason for that is basically it allows the master developer to create these parcels so that they can sell a tangible item to a home builder who then takes on the responsibilities of that tentative map approval. So everything we're doing is we're keeping it basically essentially to this west side that coincides with all the tentative map approvals. And at the same time, basically trying to clean up land use, which is 2.6 flexibility, which actually an administrative approval if it's less than 10%, which all the changes we made are less than 10%. But just purposes of being transparent and just making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of how this works is basically kind of what we've done. And we've provided staff with this table in our applications that went to you as well. That just basically shows kind of how those adjustments were made. I'm going to go back a slide just so you can see comparison of, where the bubble maps, when we're doing the PUDs, we're creating these bubble maps. And then as we get into the more detailed lotting studies, they change. And then as engineers get a hold of it and tell the planners how the lines really look, that's why that flexibility is built into that PUD. And essentially what we're doing is just kind of cleaning that up and then creating these parcels so that the master developer can sell those to the builders. And again, it's not allowing for any grading or anything like that. It's just simply creating a parcel, creating a tangible item, and that whoever were to purchase the parcel would be subject to the master developer's rules as well as the tentative map rules, as well as the PUD rules. And just to close out, I did want to kind of show this, just kind of overall view of what this West Town Center looks like. Obviously, now all the tentative maps have been approved. Just kind of gives you an idea. And then obviously the parcel maps would basically create these individual villages that the master developer would intend to sell to future builders. And so with that, I'll conclude my presentation and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Brooke, do you have a presentation?
Yes, Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. Great. Is that visible to everyone? Just to verify. So thank you for taking these. We can look at this as two cases. As Derek explained, there are two parcel maps. Now, a parcel map is usually something we do administratively. That would be reviewed by the planning, our engineering. It goes to the community development, gets signed, goes to the county. There's quite a process. This is unique because they're doing two parcel maps. And by state law, it requires, if you do more than four within a certain time period, it requires a public hearing. This was contemplated within the PUD handbook that this would happen. They've set up some other rules within the PUD handbook that sort of address this process and this hearing process. But as Derek said, this is really a way, it's not a way to avoid a tentative map because we just approved several tentative maps associated with these parcel maps. It's really a way now to take those parcel maps and be able to package them. And so the master developer can appropriately either move to develop them in phases or sell those to merchant home builders to develop. The basic information of going over the tentative maps, we saw two additional tentative maps approved this evening and looking at the overall site and the parcels that will be created. And so this shows the older villages A large parcel will be created that we'd anticipate we'd see future parcel maps on in the future. And then we're creating those per each tentative map that we've approved. This is just showing what Derek went over quickly. There is flexibility allowed within that handbook up to 10%. The applicant's representative did a great job of getting that information so that we can continue to track that. This is something we'll ask for at every parcel map or this sequential parcel map that we'll see, so we continue to make sure that we are meeting the handbook guidelines. Currently, they're not exceeding everything, and they're within the bounds of what that is. To the left there, it's just showing what we'd start to see really when we come into the approval. We'll see the Mylar maps that will come in. And so there's an additional, we'll have a hearing approval tonight, but there's also an additional approval that will happen on these parcel maps as they go forward. So staff's reviewed them, feels comfortable with them. After this approval, there'll be that final approval period, and it'll go through the county to.
Just to note, this is the completion of the first 10-minute round.
I have about 35 minutes prepared, and it is sequential. And because of the complexity and relatedness, I would really encourage you to let this go forward. Give me, I'm going to break it for a few minutes and talk, and then I'm going to go back to the end. And you will see and continue to see that this is like no other action that has ever been taken. The closest one is the Stonegate one, and there's a statement coming up that says we were just like Stonegate. No. The record is not true. So it's very novel. And the city's vulnerable. I understand there's a lot of people watching this on YouTube right now, more than they would. Maybe people are thinking of buying some of these tentatives, some of the folks she's talking about. And, you know, if questions are being raised about the validity of these tentative maps and these parcel maps, there's exposure here for the city, not to mention the tremendous concerns of these sensitive lands, and that's where the biggest question exists. So I would ask that you allow me this to continue in my presentation, to continue. I won't take up more time. I just want to use it all at once to present my argument. Thank you.
To finally record those maps. This is, as Derek showed before, this is just looking at the existing land use, those modifications as development really comes in and defining where those parcel boundaries and tentative maps are going to be. And then that modification coming in on those land uses prescribed by the handbook. As was stated before, they're within the bounds and requirements of the PUD handbook now to do this. So staff recommends approval of the parcel maps based on compliance with the applicable findings and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. I'm available for questions as needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. Commissioners, let's start with disclosures. Commissioner Marshall.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Gower.
Previously visited the site.
Commissioner Draculich.
Familiar with the site.
Commissioner Velto.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Munoz.
Previously visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson.
Commissioner Johnson, I conversed with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Taylor, I'm familiar with the site. Michelle, do we have any public comment?
I did not receive any public comments for item 4.5 or 4.6.
Okay, we will close public comment and ask commissioners for questions. Who would like to get us started? I don't see any hands. Are there any questions? Commissioner Marshall.
God, I'm waiting you guys out.
I tried. You clicked faster. You clicked faster than me.
Here I am.
No, wait,
Again.
you were late.
I was late. I have some conceptual difficulties what's going on with, just what's happening. And so the first question I have for Carl, which is, I'm pretty sure there's some Nevada case law on, piecemealing subdivision. So you can't use that for, the ability to subdivide into, merge and subdivide with only 4 units sequentially. So you're essentially piecemealing a 7 into a 4 and a 3. And so I'm really worried that there's a vulnerability there that, you can't use that provision to circumvent a 7, parcel map. So at what point does that stop? Can you do 40 10 times? So I'm really concerned about that.
And maybe before Carl answers, I will add a little bit of background. Both our old code and our new code have the same process, and it follows state law. And if you want an NRS reference, it's 278-464-6. And it says, again, for everyone that doesn't know, parcel maps is an administrative process. You can do up to 4 parcels with a parcel map. Anything more than 4 parcels requires a tentative map, which is a public hearing process. However, you can submit what we call subsequent parcel maps, meaning I'm going to subdivide into 4, I'm going to subdivide into 4 again, and subdivide into 4 again. We call that subsequent parcel map submittals. You can do that if you go through a public hearing process. So outlined in our code is that if you want to submit subsequent parcel maps, meaning you're subdividing your property into 4 parcels multiple times and not doing a tentative map process, you have to go through a public hearing process and you have to go to Planning Commission to do that. So that, again, it's been in code. We typically don't see these. In fact, the only time I remember seeing a similar process was on the Stonegate development when they did this exact same thing. And it followed, again, both our code and state law, which does allow this. Washoe County uses this on a regular basis, but they do it more for very large parcels. So if you have like a section of land and you're dividing it up into 40-acre parcels, they allow that. I don't even think they require Planning Commission approval. But here at the city, we typically don't see this, but it is allowed both in code and state law.
So what, if maybe Angela, you could clarify for me, because maybe I have I'm thinking about this incorrectly. So we're subdividing and then subdividing?
Yeah,
So we're
because you can
taking
do
1 acreage, but I thought they're existing parcels, so we're merging and then we're subdividing twice?
So typically what you would see in this type of case is you're creating a parcel map and it's 3 parcels plus a remainder parcel. And then your second parcel map takes that larger remainder parcel and divides it up into 3 more parcels plus a remainder parcel. So you're kind of subdividing multiple times through these subsequent parcel maps. You can do that through a merger and resub parcel map, which is another type of parcel map, where you have multiple parcels, you combine them and re-subdivide, or you can do it straight with just a straight parcel map, which is 1 parcel divided up into new parcels.
So if I look at, I guess I'm trying to I'm looking at, I don't know if it says page 2, but I think it must be a development plan of the first staff report, 4.5C, or looking at the actual parcels themselves.
So I'm going to stop it right there, and then we'll jump over to other planning commissioners who are
4.5D
confused. But I want to
and the 2 maps,
emphasize a
the
few
before and
things.
after.
First of all, they talk about the PUD.
Can't
And the
follow.
PUD, can we get in on this?
Marshall's raising with
The PUD actually contemplates what was done in Stonegate, which is you do parcel maps and then you do subdivisions. So if I could, this is from the PUD section 2.8. It's right after that 2.6 section that's called flexibility, but the flexibility is really related to just kind of lot calculations. Each phase of development within the PUD may be subdivided into 4 parcels utilizing a series of 2 or more parcel maps. That's what happened in Stonegate. And if you recall on Stonegate, I came in and appealed that because it was sequential. And at that time, the statute says if you're going to do sequential parcel maps, you have to treat it like this other thing called the tentative maps. And they weren't doing that. And so what happened? They tried to get a law change, didn't happen. And now they flipped it. Now what they've done is they did tentative maps, and they're coming into tentative maps, and then they're doing parcel maps on top of it. And I'm saying you can't do that either. They are two things that run in parallel, separated apart, and options. And when Ms. Foose says, well, the county does that a lot, the county does it a lot because they're an exemption to the state law about doing large lot land divisions, parcel maps, more or less in type, and it's an exempted, not a subdivision. These are two forms of subdivisions. And where it gets problematic, very problematic, is tentative maps, and tentative just means like, tentative, kind of, on a path. But when you come in for tentatives, you have to come in for final maps. And what they didn't do for final maps is your tentative map has to be either for the entire area for which your tentative map was approved, so you're going to final exactly what you did tentatively, or you can do a series of covering the approved tentative map. So you can bring in, but you have to encompass the whole land within your tentative map. And what they've done is they've approved a tentative map and then yanked out all these parcels, and that is very problematic for them. Likewise, the final map, when you come in for a final map must show the definite location of the subdivision. Well, they've created a subdivision here by pulling out these parcel maps that doesn't comport with the tentative. And the best I can do, and you might be hearing here pretty soon, well, Council Member Breckus is not an attorney, so she doesn't know how to interpret subdivision law. Okay, well, fair enough, I'm not an attorney, but subdivision law is, attorneys go to law school for 3 years and do things like criminal procedure. Planners like myself do all of it together, one combined. And we understand the theory and the reasons behind. And even the urban design class, which is where planners learn to be more fun and use colorful pens, gets you to understand these theoretical reasons. And the theoretical reasons are, tentatives are to sell, but also to make sure that you have all the backstop for your improvements. And the backstops here for the improvements are not in existence, and they're riddled with ambiguity. And that is somewhat inherent in the approval. But let me just show you more or less what's going on. If this is the whole...
Councilmember Reckes, I apologize to interrupt. This is the end of the second period, so we're now beginning your third 10-minute segment.
Okay. Let's say this is Daybreak. And let's say Daybreak has, 3 parcels, okay? They came in for tentative here, one on this APN, one on this APN, maybe one that crossed, maybe that one that crossed. But what they did, and they got within here the 80 lots, and maybe they got in here the 70 lots. But what they did, so those were the tentative maps, but then what they did is they came through on the parcel maps and said, we want to take out this, and then we'll call this a parcel. And we'll take out this, and we'll call this a parcel. And the unfortunate thing is, no one knows what the offsite improvements are going to be because of this thing called the CLOMAR. Remember that? The letter of map revision, which is how this thing is going to get lifted out. No one knows who's going to need to do that and where. And a lot of room exists now for someone to say, not me, you. And in a matter of fact, you hear an inconsistency here. Mr. Derek says something along like, the master builder is going to do the backbone infrastructure. The tentative maps all have findings that say that the tentative map does the improvement. And that is where the ambiguity exists. There is a path forward. I'm more than happy to discuss that, but I thought I had a copy of all the knowns, the master plan, 50 pages, a lot of science was in place, done by the time Damani Ranch got approval. And it was sewn up and tightened on who's going to do what and where. And there might be back agreements that show when I sell you this land, you're going to have to do this. But there were stopgaps for the public, and there aren't here because the CLOMAR, which I understand is sitting in somewhere in some federal office for review, does not identify who goes where and who's going to have to do what. And the opportunity for the not me, I'm selling, I sold, is very high for this body and risky. So there is another path forward. I'm happy to talk about that, but I'd like to jump over to that second page, please, if you could, or that second section.
I think it's pretty
Angela,
easy
do you have more on that?
Parcel map, but I mean, we're putting conditions. We're already putting conditions of approval on it, but I'll save that for discussion. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions? Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is kind of tangential to maybe what Commissioner Marshall was talking about. Brooke, when we're seeing these, and we can use this evening as a perfect example, we saw two tentative maps, one of which, based on these parcel maps that we're seeing, has an impact on what the underlying land use is. The tentative map with the overlay extended basically single family over neighborhood commercial. And is there the ability, because I think what Commissioner Marshall is getting to is going to become maybe more of an issue as we continue in these areas where there's multiple types of underlying land use, that as a part of the tentative map review and presentation, that maybe we're identifying and addressing what we see as changes in the land use prior to this being something that's at the parcel map stage. Because I think the issues that Commissioner Marshall's raising with respect to open space, and in my mind, and this one, like neighborhood commercial, it would be, I think, incumbent upon us to look at that at the tentative map stage, because that that's where we can condition, that's where we can look at it and say, hey, you're putting lots, the western edge of 19 is extending into what was classified as open space. Are we okay with that? So I guess that is a question maybe to you in terms of what you're looking at, and Derek as well from a presentation. Can that be looked at on subsequent tentative maps to be able to identify, before we're at the parcel map stage where we're looking at the accounting, but to actually say, hey, this tentative map is shifting the boundaries so that we're at a point where we can actually do something about it, as opposed to now where it's being recorded as a parcel map.
That is, yeah, certainly something we can include in the future staff reports, and also, address through the hearing itself, is keeping kind of a running tally. Now, the handbook does allow, and we have to work within the realms of that handbook, it does allow 10% and allows them to modify that. And that's largely due that they're, looking at something 50,000 feet in the air, and now they're putting it on the ground, and there are those little things. So we can certainly say, we're anticipating a impact of X loss here, in the future, or we've gained back X amount of open space on this project, right? We can certainly make sure that as we move forward, we can do that accounting so that the Planning Commission is aware of that tentative map. If you do have concerns, or if there's something, we can address that at that time.
And I appreciate that, Brooke. And I guess, Derek, I would ask the same question for you in terms of when these are being presented, is that, you're obviously looking at a much more, detailed view on this, but you're understanding where these changes are at. Is that something that you can be including on the future tentative maps that we're going to be seeing, so we can be looking at these changes with the tentative map rather than with a subsequent parcel map?
Eric Kirkland, Wood Rogers for the record. Yeah, and we can agree to put these in with the tentative maps. I think the reason you didn't see them in the previous tentative maps is because we were within that 10%. And so we were pushing and pulling based on grading, where we have drainage, where we're actually looking at drainage and doing things at, at a ground level scale, rather than kind of these bubble map scales where, it's kind of more of a broad brush. But we can put these in the tentative maps. I think we would just ask, out of that kind of same token is that, we look at that within what's allowed in the PUD. But it'll give us a chance to explain why maybe we're pushing and pulling certain areas. So I definitely think that, we could put this with the tentative maps going forward.
No, and I appreciate that, because I think what we're getting to is, as Commissioner Marshall points out, starting to look at tentative or at parcel maps is not something we do, but land use is something that the Planning Commission is looking at all the time. So just to have an understanding to say, look, this is going to, we're pushing this boundary here, we're adjusting this boundary here. It would be good to have that understanding, when we're reviewing it, as opposed to now a month and a half after we looked at those tentative maps, and we're now, just seeing, yes, it's a minimal impact, but it is an impact, and it would be good to be able to understand that at the tentative map stage. So I'm not going to belabor this anymore. Both of you kind of understand where we're going, and I appreciate that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I have a couple quick questions. Pretty basic, I think. So Derek, what is driving this process? Why is the request being made, and what would happen? What's the default if they're not approved, or I guess that's my first two questions. What's the alternative?
Derek Kirkland, Wood Rogers for the record. So as I mentioned, it's really just creating these, right now it's 2 large parcels that and you have 4, so you got backbone infrastructure that's going to get put in. And then you have these 2 large parcels that have 4 basically 4 approved tentative maps now on those within these mixed parcels. And then we also have the park that the master developer is eventually going to put in. So really what we're trying to do is just clean it up and basically have those village boundaries match the tentative map, so they can set a tangible parcel to a home builder that now takes on those responsibilities of that tentative map. And essentially the developer can focus on the backbone and the park, and they're the things that they need to do, kind of let the merchant builder deal with their own parcel that also has an approved tentative map on it. To answer your second question, they weren't to be approved. I honestly don't know what that would do. I mean, you have approved tentative maps, so I don't know, other than delaying the how does a merchant builder come in and purchase a parcel? They would basically have to purchase a tentative map and go forward, and I think, as Angela mentioned, it just adds time to that process, and we're trying to find ways to try to get the builders to put these houses in quicker. So I think it would have a negative impact there.
Okay, so then
it's just really just a cleanup type thing, more or less. We were trying to make it complicated.
No, and I just think it's because I haven't seen this request, so I'm trying to really understand it and not overcomplicate it for myself. My next question is, for the parcels, how many tentative maps have been approved for the parcels? And are there parcels without tentative maps approved within them, and what happens to those parcels for the approval process moving forward?
Sorry, Derek Kirkland, Wood Rogers. So essentially, the parcels, so basically you have the tentative map parcels, and then the ones that are left over, basically, I mean, the master developer still retains ownership of all these parcels. And then the parcels that are remaining,
This is the beginning of the final 10 minutes.
The master developer still retains ownership, and they basically only sell kind of the villages, and we basically align these with the approved tentative maps. And so, we could have come in and asked for these park maps for the entire PUD, but our thought was, all this is meant to do is basically set aside the boundaries of these tentative maps, so that as they sell each village for a builder to build on, that builder has a tangible parcel with an approved tentative map. And so that was kind of the thought behind that. And as we move to the east side of the town center, we would be doing a similar thing where we come in with the tentative maps, and during that tentative map process, you would see some additional sequential parcel maps that go with those tentative maps.
Okay, that helps me understand the process a little bit more. Thank you. Commissioner, other questions? Do you guys want to move into discussion now?
Can I just ask a quick question of Carl? Carl, I just can't shake this this feeling that I've read a case that basically disapproves of some kind of, I don't know whether it's sequentially or piecemealing parcel maps, or if it's a, subdivision that really whacked the local jurisdiction that was essentially trying to, work the way around the 4 unit. And if maybe I'm thinking of a California case or something, but are you confident that what we're doing is illegal?
Yes, I'm confident that it's legal. I'll do some additional research, but I agree with Angela.
Further discussion, commissioners? This is really complicated for me, and it's, I'm not sure it needed to be, but
It really is complicated, and it appears very much to be for the convenience and timeliness of this project's applicant, but I am very concerned about the backstop to the city. And there is a path forward, I believe. I think it was inherent to have a project approved to this level to allow it to go forward to tentatives, which, believe me, I do agree. They are Mr. Pogney calls them an entitlement, which I don't really think statute looks at it, but they are a tangible right. They are an enhanced property right. And if you get to that point with a lot of things hanging out there, and that's where Mr. Marshall, I think, was going, but I think he was a little bit off. There's vulnerability to the city. If it works great. If it doesn't, there's a record here that we did some subdividing through a real crazy process. And I maintain that you do not do parcel mapping and tentative maps in the same. You choose either path under law. So what is that path forward? I would like to say that and the record of this path we did it in Stonegate. They did it in Stonegate once and then tried to get the law changed, and then here flip-flop the process that they did in Stonegate. So the question is, why didn't you parcel map and then come tentative? Because they're making it up as they go, in my view, to go fast. And here's the path forward. Affirm the appeal. Direct staff to bring forward the agreement for council approval that is contemplated on page 23 of the PUD, which says, prior to submittal for the first application for a village parcel map, the master developer and staff will agree to an efficient process. Let's see what that agreement was. Because, they said, well, we kind of sat and talked about how to do this. It should have been inked. The PUD wanted an agreement. I want to see the agreement. Everyone needs to see what that agreement is and make sure that it is a good, consistent with statute. In those agreements, I think guidelines should be drafted that contemplate floodplain-related improvements and responsibilities, those CLOMAR improvements hanging out there in some federal agency under review, assignment and cross-reassignment of responsibilities, and bonding levels and timing of bonding. These are already understood as the CLOMAR submittal is sitting in there. Because either tentative maps or parcel maps must be deployed, the so-called remainder parcels where improvements are likely to go. The developer's not sending them selling the wetlands. They're holding on to the tough land, which is going to need those CLOMAR approvals. And so I think they can map in whole and map out those lands that are going to be held back outside, but keep them within a tentative map boundary is my way of thinking. And I think actually that's how Damani Ranch did it too. This not apart sort of thing, or these parcel maps is not a legitimate process in my view. And because we don't have a CLOMAR, which is in striking comparison to about 400 pages of technical review and data to the flooding risk that Damani Ranch did, there's a lot of unknowns hanging out there. Who's going to do them, where they're going to happen, who's going to be responsible if this project goes sideways. And we know we've got people who want to sell tentative maps and get out of town as fast as they can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Breckfast. Okay. Did you say you have public comment?
Madam Mayor, we do have one public commenter in the audience, William Mantle.
Go right ahead.
Madam Mayor, do we have Mr. Pani's presentation?
I don't know. I don't see it on here.
The ordinary order here is that we'll take the public comment, and then Mr. Pani or Mr. Durling or Ms. Whitaker on behalf of Daybreak will be given their opportunity to speak.
We're pulling up your PowerPoint now.
Good evening, Council. Okay, so I understand where we're at already in this process. I know we're deep in it, but I've had an issue with this development for quite a while, since being on the Ward 3 Neighborhood Advisory Board, and all these people stormed in our room and was like, don't build here, don't build here. So I did think about that. And you are all aware of the master plan to a level that is well advanced and beyond mine. So that's where I want to start, because that's what I'm looking at. And the slides that I have here today are from the master plan, except one for some correspondence and one from the developer themselves. So I just want to make some points. I'm not going to go through everything because I don't have the time for it. So I want to first point out that the picture on the left, that's the development area. The picture on the left, that's the development area. That's an open space. The picture on the bottom, that's the development area. And the picture on the bottom there, that's also the development area. Each of these slides that you just saw were about preservation of natural resources, beauty and open space, greenways, and the natural essence and precious resources of our region. Those are highlighted and marked for preservation to the utmost capacity that we have here in Reno, because there's no more land like that. That is the end of it. Everything else is developed or in a floodplain or will never come back. I go on just to make sure we know what we're talking about in a grander scheme. It's that red square down at the bottom. I want to talk about public safety services real quick. Again, I have to go fast.
Mr. Mantle, do you mind speaking into the microphone?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Here you go. I wanted to point out that this is our fire protection, as again, in the master plan. Two of the stations that are listed there don't actually exist, so I'm not sure why they can influence the current response times, which to me estimates it more to be 8 to 10 minutes than 4 to 6 minutes. And I think that's problematic for this area when we already have 40,000 people per the census tracts as I review them, and that's growing every day. Police facilities, it's a giant area for police to respond to, and I've never seen a patrol car in my life there. And I've lived there for many years, except upon request by me, to be honest. You are familiar with the flood hazards down in this area. I've highlighted it. That's where all our floodwater goes, south of I-80 and west of 395. There's our floodplains again, right into that area. I don't know why we would consider building in a 1% floodplain when the master plan strictly states development in these areas will be strongly discouraged, verbatim. This is the open space that is supposed to be encouraged for water absorption. That is a giant fat mountain that will not absorb any water. It will divert water around it, and the development itself will displace all the water that is on that plain. And I don't know if you remember, Mr. Delgado, but the 2017 flooding was pretty bad in our region. You could not get out of our area except going all the way up to Steamboat and crossing to the highway there, or going all the way up Veterans at the time. So I assume that's going to make it worse. Again, floodplain protection, super important and what we should be focused on. And let's go further. And this, it is marked as statewide important farmland, which here's the definition of that as I asked the USDA for us. And I think it's really important to consider this as the best farmland if we ever want to do anything natural in our region on, period. So that's all the time I have. Thank you.
All right, good job, thanks.
In addition to that, Madam Mayor, we did receive public comment in the audience from Kimberly Rodemeyer in support of the appeal, but she does not wish to make a public comment.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, we are looking to Mr. Pani to make his presentation.
Thank you. Michael Pani, McDonald Crono, on behalf of the master developer and applicant. As you've heard, this appeal involves 4 applications, 2 sequential parcel maps subdividing 2 parcels into 7, and 2 tentative maps. Ms. Breckes' appeal is limited to 2 procedural questions. 1, whether the Planning Commission correctly applied the sequential parcel map process that is authorized by law and the Daybreak PUD. And whether the land that's previously been approved for a tentative map can be subdivided with a parcel map. This is solely a question about process. First, it's important to keep in mind this is a PUD, and this seems to be overlooked both by Ms. Breckus and by Commissioner Marshall in the video. Pursuant to NRS 278A, subdivision procedures can be modified or custom tailored to a project through the adoption of a PUD handbook. In fact, the code says to avoid the delay and uncertainty which would arise if it were necessary to secure approval by a multiplicity of local procedures of a plat or a subdivision, those land use regulations can be modified through the handbook, and regulations that otherwise would apply cease to apply once that handbook has been adopted. That is exactly what has happened here. We talked about two types of maps. Parcel maps, as Ms. Foose indicated, subdivide parcels into up to 4 parcels. In this case, the Daybreak handbook itself specifically says, consistent with 278-464 and your code, that phased development can occur through the creation of these large village parcels, which would occur, quote, utilizing a sequential series of 2 or more parcel maps. In other words, the PUD specifically contemplates and authorizes multiple parcel maps to be processed at the same time so that more than 4 village parcels can be created. This is the exact flexibility that the PUD is intended to create. By comparison, tentative maps do not subdivide land. Contrary to what Ms. Breck has said, these are not subdivisions. They are a preliminary step. They're an entitlement that approves the concept of a future subdivision that will occur at a later date when a final map is recorded. Tentative maps are more detailed. They show the design of a future subdivision, lot layouts, roadways, infrastructure, a lot of those details, but they are not in and of themselves subdivisions. Critical to some of the comments she made, they do not give you the ability to go build. You still have to get grading permits, building permits. All of the things she's speaking to about Clomar, the concern she's talking about, those have to be satisfied before you can get those permits. Those building and grading permits are a subsequent entitlement that are down the road. They're required under the tentative maps, and you have to comply with city code and all applicable laws to get them. Nothing is improper in this process. Critical to this appeal, Nevada law and the handbook itself expressly allow the approval of both parcel maps and tentative maps, and they allow them to occur in any order at any time. So let's turn to what happened in this case. This is what the project looked like, or the property looked like, before the Planning Commission approval. 2 parcels shown in red with 2 tentative maps which had previously been approved for villages 19A and 18B. Those tentative maps are not before you tonight. They were never challenged. They're final and they are authorized. So, first thing that came to the Planning Commission was this, a tentative map for 18A shown in white. As I said, tentative maps show the lot layouts, roads, roadway infrastructure, and things of that nature, and that's why it shows the configuration you see. Next was the tentative map for Village 19B, down below, again, showing the lot layouts and the roadway configurations. So, having now secured tentative maps for 4 villages, what's the next step? Well, we need to move those parcel lines so that they align with the tentative map so you can actually go and sell these to a builder. So the first thing that happened was a parcel map, which took those 2 parcels and subdivided those into 4, shown here. 3 of which align with those tentative maps that had already been approved, and the remainder is one big remainder parcel, because remember, you can only do 4. But of course, the Daybreak PUD lets you bring some sequentially, so at the same time, a second parcel map was brought, subdivided that big remainder parcel into 4 new parcels. 1 aligning with the village in 18A, 1 parcel 3, which is identified as a commercial use under the handbook, and leaving 2 remainder parcels. The end result, 2 parcels are now 7, and now the parcel lines match and align with those tentative maps so you can sell those in the ordinary course. In her appeal, Ms. Breckus raises 4 arguments. First, she contends that approving a parcel map minutes after you approve a tentative map is somehow improper. Notably, she cites no law in support of her arguments because none exists. This process is authorized by Nevada law, as Mr. Hall has indicated. As we said, parcel maps and tentative maps are separate processes. They result in different entitlements. They're not exclusive or contradictory. They can occur at the same time, different times. One can go before or after the other. There's no limitation or restriction anywhere in the law. It's done all the time throughout the city on other projects. Whether you move that line before or after the map is completely irrelevant. Second, she contends that the conditions of approval on the parcel maps are somehow unlawful because they differ from the conditions on the tentative map. Well, I would submit to you, not only is it lawful, it's logical. A tentative map, as I said, does far more than a parcel map. It identifies street layouts. It allocates density. It identifies the specific lot layouts, access, traffic circulation, backbone utility infrastructure and phasing, preliminary grading and drainage plans, and it provides the underlying land use entitlement to create residential lots. So necessarily, the conditions that come with a tentative map are going to be far more detailed than they're going to be on a parcel map because the resulting entitlement is completely different. So there's nothing untoward by the fact that these two conditions differ. In fact, if they didn't, I would suspect something might be astray. Third, she contends that the conditions of approval of the tentative maps are improper because they require the construction of off-site improvements. Well, this is exactly how tentative maps are done every day. This is how you get roads and sewer lines and traffic signals. Impacts caused by the development has to construct those in order to build the development. So it is commonplace, in fact, not every single case, that you have these types of requirements on a tentative map, because otherwise, how are you ever going to develop the project if you don't construct the off-site infrastructure to get there in the first place? Again, nothing untoward about this. It's what's always done. Finally, nothing in Nevada law requires that these tentative maps or parcel maps be subject to an agreement with the city. I would respectfully submit that she's confusing the procedures for a development agreement in 278.0201 with the processes for tentative and parcel maps. While it's true development agreements can modify these procedures, just like a handbook can, it's completely irrelevant here because this is not entitled through a development agreement, it's entitled to a handbook. So you look to the handbook and what it says controls. In conclusion, there's no legal or factual basis to support any of her arguments on this appeal. They are contrary to law, contrary to the clear procedures authorized by statute, city code, and the handbook, and the routine historic subdivision processes the city has followed. We would submit that the appeal of these procedures really has nothing to do with the procedures. Rather, it appears motivated by a desire to delay development and an unwillingness to accept the prior decision of this council to approve the project. It's a second bite at the apple, an attempt to undo what was lawfully approved, to cost the developer unnecessary time and expense, and to interfere with and delay development. To be sure, delay hurts the developer, but more importantly, it hurts the community. It hurts the construction worker looking for a job. It hurts the working family trying to find an affordable home, but they can't because supply is so far behind demand. It hurts the end user through an increased cost. It hurts the city through wasted staff time, council hearings, delays in receipts of impact fees, property tax increases, construction of necessary infrastructure, and it hurts the process. We would submit to you that her appeal is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the law, and we would respectfully request for all of these reasons, as well as those in our July 6th letter, that the appeal be denied and the Planning Commission approval of all 4 maps be upheld. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, at this time, I'm going to bring questions back to the body, and I'm going to ask council members if they have any questions. Go ahead, Councilman Reese.
Thank you. I have questions, I think, for a number of people, so I want to start perhaps with Mr. Hall and your legal team. Mr. Hall, I want to understand a couple of things. Number one is sort of a process issue, and that is to say that when the items come to the Planning Commission before they come to us, if they should come to us, and the staff begins working on them, Ms. Foos, Mr. Michelle, the other members of the various departments that work on them, do they have access to your office to ask questions during that process? I mean, does our planning staff come to you in the normal course of business and ask questions about the legal efficacy of a thing?
Yes.
Okay, and so in this particular case, I make an assumption that given some of the complexities involved in the items being discussed, that there would have been some effort on the staff's part to come and ask about, hey, this is perhaps something that's unusual to me or foreign, and we work through it. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, we work collaboratively with the Community Development Department, and we review all of the Planning Commission items before they go before the Planning Commission. So, we're in lockstep with the Planning Commission, and when there's issues, we sort them out and try to make sure that we're operating within the law so that we don't, have negative consequences down the road.
Well, and similarly, the planning commissioners, they have access to and can ask questions about the legality of a thing. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to understand then, how many people do you believe have examined this process as to this particular project from a legal standpoint? I mean, how many lawyers have had some role in looking at or examining this process, do you think? Is it three of you?
At least three in my office.
Yeah. And those are all people who are experienced in this area of law?
Yes.
Okay. What about the question that Ms. Breckus raises about the backstop? The concern that she raises is that the city is somehow going to, at some future point in time, be on the hook for, I don't know if it's a road that doesn't get built, and she characterized this as like a future taking.
I feel confident that the PUD handbook provides a safety net for the city as the master developer, as the ultimate responsibility to make sure that all the infrastructure and other requirements under the tentative map get fulfilled.
Well, but Ms. Breckus points to the example of one of the South Meadows developments. I don't know if she was talking about Double Diamond or Damani Ranch. It was a little confusing in the presentation, but somehow that we were the backstop and we got left holding the bag.
Well, my recollection on that issue was there were some drainage issues that were unclear as to who was going to provide for cleaning up the ditches. And at the end of the day, we really didn't have any responsibility for it, but there were some decisions that were made that we would take some responsibility, and that, that is an ongoing issue. But that doesn't have anything to do with sequential parcel maps or tentative maps.
Okay, and that's it for this round. I have a number of more questions, but I'm just going to go in order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other council members? Do I have any council members on the phone? Go.
I do.
I think that's Councilwoman Dewar. Okay,
Yes.
then I'll go after you, Councilwoman, if there's no other questions. Go ahead.
Okay, I am trying to get my mind around this. So my first question does relate to flooding and wetlands, and that is, has the 404 permit been issued by the Corps of Engineers? Could our staff or the applicant answer that?
Mike Michelle, engineering manager for the record. The short answer to that is no.
Okay. So what I'm concerned about with this process is I wanted to understand at the beginning, Ms. Fu said a parcel map relates to a single individual property. That was the analogy she used, the APN. And so where I got confused right at the front end of this was we started talking about parcel maps that incorporate something like 20 or 40 lots. And I wasn't sure whether it was all 80 lots. And so that was one question. Is a parcel map a independent unit for an individual house, or is it a group of houses? And the reason I'm asking this, too, is that we've heard over and over that you can do 4. And so I'm a real basic person. 4 means 4, but somehow we ended up with 7. And I'm not sure how we got there. I guess my basic question is why didn't the applicant just use separate tentative maps for each of the areas that they intend to sell? What drove them down this path? What are they trying to accomplish? So first question is, what is a parcel map? Is it a individual lot, as Ms. Fuss initially said, or is it a group of lots? How can there be more than 4 before you trip a different threshold? Could you answer those, Ms. Fuss, maybe?
Yep, a parcel map is a process that creates up to 4 parcels. If you want to create 5 parcels, you can't do that through a single parcel map. You have to either do that through subsequent parcel maps, meaning more than one parcel map, or through a tentative map. So if you want to create 5 parcels, you would have to create 2 separate parcel maps. The first map would have 4 parcels. The second map would then have would create that 5th parcel.
But can you continue to subdivide this way? Take each remainder parcel and divide it in 4 and then further 4? Is there a limit to this parceling?
The only requirement is that you have to go through a public hearing process. Normally, a parcel map process is just staff review. There is no public hearing. If you subdivide a parcel more than once, so more than one parcel map within a 5-year period, that's your trigger, then you have to go through a public process. And in this case, they did that by going to the Planning Commission. They submitted 2 separate parcel maps to ultimately end up with 7 parcels. And they did that through the subsequent parcel map allowances. And that, again, is allowed per state law, per zoning code, and per their handbook.
Okay, so the key I didn't know was about the 5-year. So they can do so much parceling within a 5-year time frame. And then it sounds like if they exceed that, then they have to go into a public process.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I have more questions, but it looks like my time's up.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilman Delgado.
Both council members asked the majority of my questions. One I just want to get on record was with respect to the Clomar, Angela. There's a lot of questions related to the Clomar as to when someone can build or not build. Can we build prior to the Clomar, et cetera? Can you just make sure we're all aware that you can't, how that process, some of the stopgaps?
That's correct. On the Clomar, so that is a FEMA mapping process. That process has to be approved through FEMA before they can move any dirt. So before they do mass grading, they have to have an approved Clomar.
So for members of the public that are maybe watching or anything else, no development's going to take place without Clomar being approved and presented to the city and so forth, correct?
That's correct. No houses can be built, no utilities can be put in, no grading can be done. Nothing can be done until that Clomar is approved.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilman Reese.
Thank you. And it's sort of strange because we had 40 minutes of presentation and then 10. And so I have more questions than probably can be asked in the 3 minutes, but I assume had I had 4 different appeals, I would have had 12 minutes plus in each one of them. So just bear with me as I try to ask some questions. I'm still with you, Mr. Hall, and I'm sorry to not let you off quite so easily. But I want to go back to sort of an extension of Mr. Delgado's question about the Clomar. Does any of the parcelizing, and that's my word, not probably a technical term of art, any of the efforts that were undertaken through the Planning Commission, do any of those impact the Clomar?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And if the Clomar comes back and it identifies some scientific reason for a particular thing not to be built or built upon in a particular area, because I make an assumption, having looked at some Clomars, that ultimately is what some of them provide the result of. Will these parcelizations and these characterizations of the tentative map process, can they be used to support, I suppose, either a takings argument or some entitlement claim if, in fact, the Clomar controls? So I'm saying which controls, the Clomar or the tentative map or the parcel maps?
The Clomar.
Thank you. Ms. Foos, can I ask you a couple of questions? And I apologize for putting it this way. I want to make sure you understand at the outset that I think you and your team have done an outstanding job of making this very complicated thing, something that we can digest on this body. The presentation was excellent. And so don't take my questions the wrong way, but you, can you give me your professional background and experience?
So I am an AICP licensed, which is the planning certification. I have 20 years of planning experience, both in government and in private sector. I have reviewed parcel maps and tentative maps. I've been part of the design of parcel maps and tentative maps. And so I have a wealth of knowledge on both sides, as the regulator and the one that's being regulated.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I suppose the reason why I ask is because, we have Councilmember Breckus who stepped off of her elected role to be at the dais as an appellant, and she also has an extensive background in educational bona fides that I do not possess. I am a lawyer by profession, and I want to understand deeply these things, but I simply cannot replicate your 20 years of experience or her. Maybe it's more than that at this point in time. So I guess my point in connecting these two is to understand you're doing a job and you're doing it well. I'm just going to say it that way, and I appreciate what you're doing. In your professional experience, has this process gone according to how you believe it should have played out? Meaning, did you do what you were supposed to do? Did we follow the process as it's supposed to be done? And based on your professional experience, have we done what we should have done in this case?
Yes, and there's been a couple levels, I would say, to that review process. One is when the handbook was first created. There was a long line of vetting that specific language about the village parcels. That was a new concept. Village parcels is not a terminology we have in our zoning code. So a lot of professionals went, engineers, attorneys, lawyers, planners, a lot of thought went into that language to make sure it met law. Subsequent to that, when this application came in, again, this wasn't reviewed just by a team of planners. It was reviewed by engineers as well and attorneys. We have a long review process in everything we do. Tentative maps and parcel maps are both part of that long review process. We all come from different disciplines and expertise, and we all weighed in and agreed that this was acceptable and met all the rules and regulations.
And I appreciate that explanation in part because, as you recognize, we sit as a quasi-judicial body in this case, meaning we have, we're sort of acting as though we're judges. I won't say it's really quasi-judicial. I understand that to mean something else. But the point is that we have to eventually, at some point in time, make up our own minds as individual electeds, and we are doing so based on the lawyer who's presented some information, evidence to us. You have presented information, evidence, and the way I evaluate a person's information also is through the lens of their credentials, and you've given me those. Mr. Hall, I believe, has extensive credentials that I do not possess. But my point is, now I want to ask, as to the people who you believe have reviewed it, how many people have had their hands on this thing that are, as you said, planners, engineers, and lawyers?
Within that realm, we probably have 6 different individuals, just with planning and engineering, and then a team of lawyers, at least 3 lawyers that we review all land use decisions with on a regular basis. So they all had a touch point and a review point in this process.
And how many hours would you estimate were spent in the review of this process and to getting us to today? And I'm sure it's a very large number.
From start to finish, all of us, there's probably 80 hours.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions that I have for you, Ms. Foose. I do have questions for Mr. Pawnee, but I want to give my colleagues the opportunity to ask their questions. Thank you.
Okay. Any other council members? Go ahead, Councilwoman Weber.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to ask Ms. Foose, when was the first time that we heard about Daybreak?
Oh, gosh, I would say probably 2014, 2015. I have to look at the applicant for that. When did you guys start the process? 2018.
Okay.
So 3 years ago.
2018. Okay. I think I might have been on one of those votes as I was just newly elected. So it's been quite a long time. And I heard our councilwoman, the appellant, saying that it's been a big rush. Everything's a rush. And I'm concerned because 3 years, and this is a long time. And as Mr. Pawnee had suggested, time is money. Time creates cost. And I loved what you said, Mr. Pawnee, and I hope that we hear it again. And I was going to ask if you would repeat that, because I think that's really important, because I don't think this process has been just rushed. I think that it was well thought out, it's worked, and it is a handbook, and handbooks really are the best thing in planning, I believe, for some of these large projects. So anyway, I just wanted to ask you about that, and I think it was 2018 that we first had my first vote. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I think Councilwoman Dewar, you had some? No? Okay. I guess my question is for Councilwoman Breckus. Gosh, it seems so loud.
Can you not hear me? I'm sorry.
Did you? I thought you said you had another
I
question.
was. I do.
Oh.
I thought you could hear me. It's so muted on my phone, but okay.
Okay.
My question.
Okay.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just going to ask Councilwoman Breckus a question, and then I'll have you jump in.
Yeah.
So I guess, what is your understanding of the PUD process? Because Mr. Pawnee is saying we have to remember this is a PUD process and it can be modified.
Yeah, thank you. So he did say it could be modified. I did not cross-check to that citation, and so I would ask him what that citation was. I would say I don't believe that's true. I think that you have to stand with the NRS provision, and but even say you did, it's not even following the process that was outlined. You would do these parcel maps and then you would do tentative maps. So I do not agree with that. Also, I want to say relevant is Ms. Foose said, well, you can do parcel maps and it's just a public hearing. That's not true. That's what Mr. Marshall was getting at, is if you do these sequential parcel maps, you have to treat them like tentative maps with all the analysis and applicability of how you would apply it as if it was a tentative. So what you're doing is you're doing a tentative where you say lot 73, looks on the corner here and has this little local street, and then you have a parcel map. At minimum, the parcel map should also include the tentative map, but it's parceled it out. And so I think that is the problem right there, is that you're walking in tandem and you can't do that. I think that there is a path forward. I would encourage you, because I think there's some circling of the wagons. I did not play the part here where Mr. Marshall says, will you just brief this for us a little bit more, maybe for next time? And he says, sure, I'll do that. I don't know, maybe you got the brief, but I sure didn't. I would ask you to kick this back down to the Planning Commission if you want, for a clear briefing. There is a provision in the PUD, which Mr. Pawnee talks a lot about, is, staff and the developer are going to agree upon the process. Well, where's that agreement? It was never in the record. Show it to us so we can all understand.
Is that required?
It is required. I will show you the language. This is section 2.8. Prior to submittal of the first application for a parcel map, and I will say to you that my reading is that they're going to do parcel maps first and then tentatives, just like how they did Stonegate, until I said I don't think you can do it that way. But the master developer and staff will agree to an efficient process. Where's that inked? Where's that agreement? I'd like to see that agreement, and I would encourage you to send this back down to the Planning Commission to get the briefing that Mr. Marshall asked for. Mr. Hall said he would get on the legal questions of doing these two in process, and then the other issue of, can you do parcel maps? Does it circumvent tentatives? That question that he asked very pointedly, and then to show you this agreement and the content of this agreement, and then have a do-over on that, on these. Thanks.
Anything to that agreement?
Yes, Michael Piney for the record. So again, the PUD itself, under 278-460, authorizes you to modify those subdivision procedures. It does. The handbook itself sets forth the procedures. The language she's referring to is there will be an agreement between staff and the applicant as to what we're going to submit with those applications. The process itself is set forth in the PUD. Staff did meet with the applicant, and we did have an agreement on what information we would submit to that. It's nothing that comes in writing. It's not like a legal contract.
Yeah, I didn't.
Just
I
what
was
information you're
looking
going to
at it, it
submit.
didn't say in writing, so I didn't know if
Correct.
maybe you had something or.
But it was reached, and again, this is not the first parcel map we filed on this project. We've had 4 prior tentative maps approved. The whole east side was approved previously under the same process.
All right, thank you. Okay, Councilwoman, go ahead. Sorry, Councilwoman Dewar, 1 second.
Well-
Councilman Reese, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, I only wanted to ask because Mr. Pani was at the lectern. As I understood it, though, and Madam Mayor's question, I think, gets to the deeper issue, which is there are 2 ways for subdividing property: parcel maps and final subdivision maps. So in this case, under, I guess it's NRS 478-4646, that is the method by which you have, in this case, subdivided this parcel.
That, together with the ordinance you adopted, which is the PUD
Yeah,
handbook.
and I'm not suggesting that the PUD handbook doesn't trump, but I think what Madam Mayor was asking really is that there has to be a legal vehicle. And my response to that would be that not the, lawyers can talk their way out of anything, but my point is the real answer is 278-464-6 is what provides the mechanism for doing it. It is one of the 2 ways that can be done. Is that correct?
That is correct. Also, your city code 18.08704 then implements that statute. And then those were both implemented even further and further refined by the Daybreak PUD, which is adopted as an ordinance and of course has the effect of law, consistent with the enabling authority granted under 278-464.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is that if for you're kind of like belt and suspenders. I'm just saying the one that I think is most on point is the Nevada revised statute that answers it. And so I'm not sure I have to get further into it than that, but that's just me.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Dewar.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you. My question is, Mr. Pani said that this was an extremely standard process, done all the time, very, very within the lines, so to speak. And I really have to question that because our planning commission is pretty savvy. They've been doing this, most of them, for over 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And they seemed very confused, to Ms. Breckes' point. I mean, we got to watch them think about it, deliberate it, and say that they were confused. And my concern is this is a big project, 1,000 acres, 4,000 homes. It is a complicated project. It is very complicated in terms of the sensitive nature of the land. And so I'm wondering, on top of this technical sensitivity, technical complexity, why they chose to do such a complicated process. Why did they not choose to just do separate tentative maps, a more standard order that we could understand? And I want an answer to this, and the reason is that my main concern is that the water situation in this area is complicated, that a Clomar will come out. The Clomar will come out. It will require many improvements over the entire project. And what I'm worried about is that we have sort of a multi-layer cake. And if one of the layers is a color, and that color is the flood control plan, and then we start cutting up this cake in parcels, in 7 parcels, recutting it up, subdividing it further. What I'm worried is that we may be losing the integrity and the accountability to the master flood control plan. So I'm going to go back to my question for Mr. Pani. Why didn't you do just separate tentative maps? Why is the need to do this complicated parceling map process?
Michael Piney for the record. So again, the Daybreak PUD handbook contemplates that village parcels, large pads, would be created for sale to merchant home builders. That's why we did this process. I can't sell a tentative map that includes land outside of the tentative map. So we needed to get the entitlements of the tentative map, which would enable that merchant home builder then to comply with all applicable laws and regulations, including the CLOMAR requirements and all of the things you're speaking to. But I can't sell them that land unless the parcel lines match the map. So that's why we did the parcel map the way we did it, and it's exactly as the Daybreak PUD authorizes and contemplates.
So I get the concept of the super pads. I understand it from Stone. It's late. But what I don't understand is why you did some parcel maps and some tentative maps. What I don't understand is why you didn't do tentative maps around these super pads. If you want to sell them that way, why not just permit them that way? Get your permits for the things you want to sell and the way you want to sell them. Why mix and match these things?
So again, tentative maps do not subdivide land. And under Nevada statute, when you convey property, you have to convey a parcel. So we had to have a parcel line that matched the entitlement granted by the tentative map.
But I'm asking why you did not ask for a tentative map based on these land organization principles that you're using to sell.
I'm not sure I'm following your question. We process tentative maps in accordance with Nevada statute, your code, and the handbook in the ordinary course.
Right, but you want to sell it in a different way. You're talking about selling these super pads or whatever your villages, and I'm trying to understand why you didn't take your unit of measurement, the things you want to sell, and get a tentative map for that thing so it would be of a whole.
Again,
why this mix?
We could not sell a tentative map because the parcel line doesn't match the boundaries of the tentative map. The Daybreak PUD handbook has bubbles of different land use areas. We couldn't just put homes on the entirety of the existing parcel because the handbook requires open space, requires roads, it requires other things. So we had to comply with the handbook and the land use bubbles that you approved in the handbook. So the area for that tentative map is going to be smaller than the entirety of the parcel. Now we've got that entitlement. I can't just sell the land described in the tentative map because it's not identified as a separate legal parcel. Thus, we came in with the parcel maps to move the boundary lines so that the village parcel encompasses that entire area. Again, that's exactly how the process was intended to work through the handbook.
Okay. Well, I get why you need to do parceling at some point. I absolutely do. What I don't understand is the mix and match of doing them kind of simultaneously. And you've said your answer. I still don't understand. Clearly, other developers maybe do a different process. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment, I guess.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? Councilman Reese, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, I want to be as specific as I can be as we try to approach a motion. And that is, at the end of the day, and it's a yes or no question, has this process and has what has played out over the course of the Planning Commission's decision, which, as I understand it, we're 6-1 on the first and 7-0 on all the others, has what has played out here, has it been legally correct and defensible as to the city?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Breckus, can I ask a question or two? You originally described the approach taken by the Planning Commission as novel. What do you take that term to mean?
Well, as you can tell, taking subsequent action on a tentative map and then a parcel map, they have said they've never done it before. Okay, and Ms. Foose said it's exactly like Stonegate. That's not accurate. I've got the records right here from Stonegate. Stonegate went on on December 6th. And this is a really good question. They went on December 6th, 2018, for their first super pad, something that was also novel. So novel that they had to go down to the legislature and try and get that introduced as a bill, and it didn't go. So, I commend anyone who wants to change law. I think these laws are a little rusty and should be made. But then on December 7, 2019, they came in for their first tentative. So they did it differently. So I just showed you evidence that it's novel, okay?
But I don't think that answers my question. I'm trying to understand. Your belief is that it's novel because it has not been done before, or it has not been done in recent years or in recent memory. And in part, this goes back to a question that I asked Ms. Foos, and I would, I suppose, ask you the same thing. And we have 7 planning commissioners with very diverse backgrounds. They all studied the issue, and yes, so that you understand, I watched it before you made me watch it a second time tonight, because I wanted to understand what the issues were. You were coming before us. I owed you that, courtesy, and I believe it was appropriate to watch it. So it was not new to me that they struggled with it. We are struggling with it. But at the end of the day, as I said to Ms. Foos, I'm acting as a decision maker, a decision maker, a finder of fact in this capacity. And I have to weigh your position, which is this is novel, and therefore we should reject it or send it back down, versus, thousands of hours of human power effort that have gone into this. You characterize that as circling the wagons. I'm just telling you what I see them doing as evidence of their having done it right. And so you want me to set aside the engineers, the planners, the architects, the planning commissioners and support your vision of it. Is that correct?
Yeah. I've sat, where you all sit, often. And I understand at the end of the day, you have to weigh everything and come to your own conclusion. So, that's no new news to anyone. I started off by saying, I really wish we had adopted our zoning code where someone could call something up and ask for a better clarification. And I think, like I said, I was not coming at this adversely. I was coming at with it. I don't think they did themselves any favors. And I know there's people watching this right now, and I'm not here to harm the project. I'm really here to make sure that the public interests are taken into account, particularly on the stopgap measures of what comes out of the Clomar, because we don't know what it is and we don't know what ground it's going. But on a technical thing is, if I'm doing due diligence to buy one of those tentative maps and I see that my final map, and he and I have a little bit of a disagreement, and maybe it's phraseology, I'd love to sit with him someday, is a tentative map is an enhanced property right. Okay, so you have to remember that it enhances your property right, because you have the right to move forward to a final map. And another enhancement is you can sell that tentative map. Mr. Marshall wonders if you can sell it with improvements or not, and that's for someone else to look into it. But a final map in accordance with the tentative map, if the tentative map that came in on that 19A is for 303 acres, because they all have an acreage, you have all seen them, says 303 acres, but then the final map is only showing, the tentative being 230, because, say 190 acres are out on this parcel. It is not comporting to the entire area for the tentative map. So you can't final map it, in my view. And whoever's going to pay a lot of money for that tentative map, I'd be pretty watching that. And maybe I'm wrong. It's fine. But, you come in with some flooding and inverse condemnation or something like that, you want to make sure you've done all this right. And so I wanted, I think it's in everyone's interest, theirs particularly, to go back to the Planning Commission and really have all these questions answered in a thorough manner. And I'll say, even my appeal today, Mr. Pogney put up a much better graphic depiction than anything that was in the Planning Commission record. So we're making a little progress, but we need to make more. That's why you need to send it back down to the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Madam Chair, I have one more question.
Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Dewar.
Okay. First, for the staff, is every part of the Daybreak project covered by a tentative map, or are there some parts of it that are not? That's for Andrew.
Yep. So a tentative map is one piece of the Daybreak Handbook. There are many, many parts of the Daybreak Handbook that don't go into effect until they get to a final map. There's also many things that are impacted by the CLOMAR and the LOMAR and the sewer design and where the fire service is coming from. So the tentative map is one small piece of the overall Daybreak Handbook.
So does the tentative map just cover the house portion and not like the wetlands, not the flood control, or are there portions of the flood control located within these tentative maps?
For this particular portion of the tentative map, there is a portion that is within, I believe, flood zone A. So because they're within a flood zone, they have to go through a CLOMAR process. Not all parts of Daybreak are in that flood zone, but the one we're looking at today,
right,
they are impacted and required to do a CLOMAR.
Okay, and then, so my question, I guess, is some of these things are tentative maps and some are parcel maps because of the sale intent. And what I'm trying to make sure is that this overall flood control master plan, is it also getting cut up with the tentative maps and the parceling? Or is it going to be done by one master developer in one piece? My understanding was it was to be built before any of the development took place. Did someone answer that?
That is correct. The handbook does require that the CLOMAR, all flood-related infrastructure, is done by the master developer. And we have different timelines of when those triggers happen. Again, the CLOMAR has to happen and be approved by FEMA first before you can move any dirt on any part of the development related to impacting within the CLOMAR area.
Okay, and then a question from Ms. Breckus here. Her very first point in her appeal says the tentative conditions subject off-site improvements to lands that are not being developed and could be in non-common ownership through the parcel maps. This could subject the city to a future takings claim. My question to her is how? In what way?
Yeah. So I think you were really getting to the heart of the matter previously with your question to Ms. Foose, and that is, is this required, is the whole project, the master developer work, everything that comes in the CLOMAR, is it to be done, when is it to be done and by who is it to be done? And I think that while it's mentioned in the PUD, the conditions for each tentative do not go in enough detail to show responsibility on the tentative also. And that was my point on my slide where I said assignments and cross assignments. The conditions, and we could open up the Planning Commission approval and show you what they are, but they are too broad. And so they need to be more descriptive and drop down all of that information because we're going to be having sales very soon of these tentative maps. Prior to even we know with finality what FEMA's approved. And I also want to say that his comments about me trying to stall this project is out in some federal person's desk. That's the time they're on right now. So we're working in tandem with this. This is not slowing it down. But your point is, your question, I would be very satisfied with the Planning Commission working or staff, bringing forward some conditions that are much more clear on what is backbone infrastructure, because it's a very generic term, and tie those more to the CLOMAR. If you look in those conditions, there's nothing about the CLOMAR and the CLOMAR results, outcomes, negotiations, whatever happens with the CLOMAR in any of those tentative maps. It says you have to meet the CLOMAR, but it doesn't really state what those are and what are the assignment to each tentative map. It may not be known right now, and that's inherent with the problem of trying to get to tentative at this point. So with that, you really need some broad conditions that assign and reassign and make sure that at the end of the day, someone's standing around to do all those improvements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
So just to wrap up, I would call it, what my biggest concern is just losing accountability. I'm just concerned that we've tried very hard to make sure that this all hangs together and works. And my concern with cutting it up this various different ways is that that process is losing the integrity and accountability that we need it to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Councilman Delgado.
Yes, Madam Mayor. So as the council representative for Ward 3, I'm looking I'm ready to make a motion if there's no further discussion. Through
Okay,
you.
go ahead, no further discussion.
Madam Mayor, I just want to, again, appreciate Councilwoman Brackus's thorough questioning of our project. I know it's a sensitive project for large project, and appreciate her thoroughness to ask the questions in addition to all my council members who have asked several of the same questions. Also appreciate staff's time and the amount of staff time that's been required to look into this project. This hasn't been the first time that this project has come before us. A team, as Councilmember Reese has stated, has been a part of these conversations. And I think it's for the better part for the community to better understand that this is a project that's being thoroughly examined and reviewed. And again, appreciate Councilwoman Breckus and everyone else's questioning of the project. So in regards to, and I'm looking at legal here, Carl, do we want to make a distinct on each item here? Are we making a motion on each one?
Yes.
Okay, so we go through each one process. And I'll look to you, Madam Mayor, if we need questions or anything else. But with item number 1, in regards to appeal of LDC 21-00054, Daybreak Plan Area 18A, I move to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission and to directly approve the tentative map as I am able to make all of the necessary findings subject to the conditions of approval, which were included in the May 19, 2021 Planning Commission staff report. The city clerk is instructed to prepare the file in order. That's my motion.
All right, so we're going to make motions for each one, correct, Carl? Okay.
Yes.
All right, just clarifying. Okay, so I have a motion from Councilman Delgado, a second from Councilwoman Weber. Any discussion?
I should maybe say one thing. I don't think I can support the motion. And the main reason is the tentative maps require a finding about conformity with zoning ordinances, master plan amendments. And I feel that we have gone, in this particular project, maybe this would work in a different place with a different environmental setting. But my concern is that the process is we're losing track of the component parts, and we're making them very discrete, and we're losing accountability in this process. So I'm not going to be able to support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Durr. So I just kind of want to sort of give an idea of what I see. And I actually think it's almost like subjective. It is a little bit subjective in the fact that it's not a process that we typically do. So it might feel foreign. However, it is certainly allowed and okay. I also see Councilwoman Breckus and her concern after some of those comments, to put this project or put these houses in much quicker, right? So I think I can see how Ms. Breckus feels very uncomfortable. But I think it is on both sides. I don't have any problems going back to the Planning Commission to get more clarity. I mean, it could potentially end up being where there is a lot of confusion and could cause liability. So I have no problem with supporting Councilwoman Breckus in that. But I do think that, the process is, what you said, it's exactly what it is. So, but I also think that there could be some argument there, not that it's a legal argument. I think it's subjective. Again, so there's two sides. One thing I do want to say about our staff, and I do think it's difficult. It is very uncomfortable when you have a council member coming and sort of, I guess, I don't want to say arguing with staff, but debating staff. Whenever I think you guys are incredibly talented, you work very hard. I don't think a lot of people realize that you even work at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I've had many conversations with, certainly other planners very, very late at night that really care about this job and what they do and are very good at it. So I want to make that abundantly clear that I think staff is very talented, and this is not an attack in any way on your talent and your expertise, because I think you have a lot of it. I just think it is subjective, and eventually it could be a problem. So I have no problem sending it back. So I am going to say no. But other than that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion
No.
carries. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Moving on to item 2, in regard to appeal of LDC 21-00055, Daybreak Plan Area 19B. I move to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission and to directly approve the tentative map, as I am able to make all the necessary findings subject to the conditions of approval which were included in the May 19, 2021 Planning Commission staff report. The city clerk is instructed to prepare and file an order.
So I have a motion, I have a second. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor, I just have a
Go ahead.
comment. You know, in addition to the finding that I cited earlier, earlier today we talked about complicated. And we talked about it in terms of agreements that the city's entered into, historical references, historical knowledge, institutional knowledge. And we all agreed that simpler was better, so that people could understand what commitments were made. And we all agreed to that. And that is, I think that Mayor made a really good point, and Councilwoman Breakfast to begin with, which is that the clarity that the Planning Commission would provide, I think, would help us implement this project in a way that we could follow it through. Our staff could, we could, and the public could. And so that is why, again, I'm not going to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I
Go right ahead.
We're good? If I can continue, in regards to the appeal of PAR 21-00034, Daybreak Plan 17, 18, 19, Map 1. I move to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission and to directly approve the parcel map, and I am able to make all of the necessary findings, subject to the conditions of approval which were included in the May 19, 2021 Planning Commission staff report. The city clerk is instructed to prepare and file an order.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No. Motion carries.
Okay, and in regards to the appeal of PAR 21.00035, Daybreak Plan 17, 18, 19, Map 2, I move to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission to directly approve the parcel map, as I am able to make all the necessary findings subject to the conditions of approval which were included in the May 19, 2021 Planning Commission staff report. The city clerk is instructed to prepare and file an order.
All right, I have a motion. I have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion.
No.
Motion carries. All right, I believe that's it. So,
Madam Mayor, we're on item J1, which is closing public comment. It should be noted for the record that these comments were received either after 4 p.m. the day preceding the meeting or are in general in nature. We received 5 comments in support and 1 comment in opposition from John Carpenter, Brian Bosma, John Benham, Susan James, Michelle Murphy, and Margot Mehmet. We have no commenters in the audience, and we're just looking for a motion to adjourn.
okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Nice job, Mickey, by the way. All by yourself. Good girl. Okay, so I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. All right. Motion carries, or motion passes unanimously. Little late. Thank you guys for sticking it out all day today. You were troopers. Good job. Good night.